Hello, this webinar is on Canadian payroll year-end processing. There's a separate webinar to view current year's tax rate changes. This webinar focused basically mainly on handling bonuses at the end of the year, doing year-end adjustments, and of course printing of the T4s and Releve ones for those that are in Quebec. So to start off with the bonuses. So when it comes to paying a bonus, there's basically two methods. You can have it just added to their regular pay, and the system will just basically combine it with the regular pay and annualize that amount and tax it based on that. You can also have it use what's called the bonus method, and that tells the system to look at what the employee normally makes and then to add the bonus to it, figure out that calculation, and then from that it comes into the tax on the bonus itself. Generally, when doing the bonus method, quite often people will run it in a separate pay period, and that's fine to do. How you dictate whether or not the system's going to use the bonus method is under the setup of the earning code. So under payroll configuration, payroll profile, if you go into customize and pull up your earning code, and it'll be this flag here, is this earning used for bonuses. So if that's set to yes, it'll use the bonus method. If it's set to no, then it'll just annualize it out like it's their normal income. So again, you may want to have two separate earning codes set up, two bonus earning codes. You know, if you have one bonus that's one earning code that you use for large bonuses, and then maybe another smaller one where it's just like $100 type bonus where you don't want it to use the bonus method, then you could have two codes set up like that if you wanted to. Now, one thing about the bonus method, especially if you're doing it on its own pay run, is the system needs to try to determine what is that employee's normal salary. So to do that, what it's going to do is go into their file and go into their payment screen, and it's going to take what their rate is and the hours. So generally it's not an issue for a salaried employee because these fields will be filled in, but for an hourly employee, quite often the hours per pay are not filled in. So I strongly recommend, if you are paying bonuses using the bonus method to hourly employees, that you do put what the average number of hours are that they would work in this field. The only time it's ever going to use that for an hourly person is when it's doing the bonus calculations. So again, it'll take those hours times their rate to see what their normal average salary would be, and then it takes the bonus on top of that. When setting up the bonus pay period, again, especially if you're setting up a special pay period for that, always recommend, if you can, to use one of your existing pay ending dates. So even if you used the date before, you can set that same date up again to do the bonus. And it'll tell you you've used the date, but it'll let you continue anyways. And that way it just kind of keeps things a little bit cleaner. But if you do want to have a completely separate date that's not a normal pay ending date, that's fine to do as well. But when you set that pay period up, you need to make sure under Deduct EI you click on bonus. And all that is going to tell the system is that this is not a normal pay period, so don't write a nil ROE record for anybody who's not in that run. So keep in mind that you should do this for any time you open up an out-of-sequence pay period. So even if it's not for a bonus, but maybe to cancel a check or to reverse a deposit or make some sort of adjustment, if you don't use the normal pay ending date for you, you should check this flag so the system knows it's not a normal pay period. A couple other flags. So if you're doing a bonus and you just want the taxes to come off, you can just hit uncheck all deductions, and that removes all these. And when you go to set up the next pay period, they will default to be checked again. The benefits, you do need to uncheck those manually if you don't want them to calculate. And then also the CPP exemption. So because the bonus is generally an extra pay period, especially if you process it on its own, if somebody's been there all, let's say you're 52 pays a year, if they've been there all 52 pays and this is a 53rd pay, and they haven't reached the maximum for CPP, you don't want it to take another exemption, because if it does, you're going to end up with a peer report for that employee. So generally I recommend you just check this flag regardless when it's a special pay period like this, to not factor the CPP exemption in at all. And then lastly over here, if you happen to have other payments per pay set up, or you have additional tax set up and you don't want those to take place, you would check those flags in that instance. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is doing year-end adjustments. So we're referring to mainly benefits that you need to get into the system. Ideally, the best option if you have these benefits is to get them in on the last payroll of the year so that the system can do all the calculations automatically for you and you don't have to worry about CPP and EI in addition to that. But having said that, if it's a case where it's not, you don't have that amount until after the last payroll of the year, easiest way to get the amount in there is just to go into Payroll, Special, and load in Edit Year to Date. Pull up your employee. And when it says which record, just choose total employee if it's just for benefit purposes. And then as of date, just hit enter through there. And that'll pull up all your figures for the employee. You just click on edit year to date. And then go down to the bottom and you have our benefit codes here. So any of our predefined benefit codes, if you put an amount in any of these B codes, it's automatically going to be included in box 14 income as well. So you don't need to also put it under an earning code. You just need to put it in the one place. So quite often a common benefit you'll add in is an auto benefit. So by putting it in here, the system knows what box it needs to go to on the T4. Like I said, it'll be in box 14, but it'll also be in the benefit box, box 34. So the only thing, as I was mentioning though, if it is the end of the year and the employee has not reached the maximum for CPP, because most benefits are pensionable as well, then whatever amount you add into the taxable benefit code, you should also add into M06, which is your pensionable earnings. So again, you need to keep those two in sync. Again, you will be short by the CPP, so you probably will result in a peer report at that point, but you still want to have those earnings matching, because generally your pensionable earnings should tie to your box 14 earnings. So again, anything that goes into a B code should be added into M06. And that is only if the employee is not maxed out. If they reach the maximum, then you don't need to worry about that part of it. And then you just say OK and OK, and then that will then reflect on the T4. So as mentioned, it doesn't post anything to the general ledger. It's just really for purposes at this point of getting it onto your T4. If you have any other items that you want to show on a T4, and that amount doesn't currently exist in the employee's year-to-date record, you would use the same process here to add in those details, and then in turn you'll tell it on the T4 screen where that amount resides, so it knows to show it on the forms. So before you get to printing your T4s, a couple housekeeping items that are good to do. One is to make sure you have updated details for your employees. So the easiest way to do that is just to go into their files here. When it comes up with your list of employees, you hit the F9 key, choose design your own, and then you can just pick from each of these tabs the details you want. So important details would be like obviously their name, their address, especially if you're going to be mailing out the T4s. And the SIN number is also important. And I'd also pull in the birth date. The reason I would pull the birth date in is the system looks at birth date when it comes to calculating CPP to determine if they're under 18 or over 70. So you want to make sure you haven't accidentally put in a birth date that was like the current day and not what their actual birth date was. And you can go into any of the other tabs as well. So in the taxes screen, if you want to pull their exemption fields, if you want to pull some of their setup for their benefits or their deductions, all that information can be extracted into this report. And then you can sort it. If you want to sort it differently, you can condition it. So if we wanted to condition it and say you just want active employees, although in this case you would want all your employees even if they were terminated, if they had pay that year. But you could say the condition must be active. And OK and print. And you have an option if you want to view it, you can PDF it, or you can smart view it and pull it into Excel as well. And so this is just an example of the report. So again, you have your addresses in there, SIN number, birth date, all that information so that you can go in and make any changes or updates that you need to do. Another item to check in your employees' files as well, and again, you can pull this through the F9 report, is in their deduction screen. If you have anybody set up with a cap rule, you need to adjust that rule for the new year. So the way a cap rule works, it's year to date, calendar year. So if the cap gets reached during the year, the system will stop deducting that deduction at that time. This is normally used for a garnishment, a loan, child support type of deduction. But once the new year rolls around, the year-to-date buckets are reset to 0. So if you don't come in and take the rate out, it's going to start deducting it again on that employee. If the end of the year comes and the employee still owes amount on it, then what you would want to do is just adjust the cap amount for whatever's left going into the new year. And then the following year, you'd go in and zero out the rate, provided they don't owe anymore, they don't have another garnishment or child support at that point. Under reports, we have a couple reports to help you check your EI and your CPP calculations. So if you go to Report Gen Design, they'll be at the bottom of your list of reports and have an underscore before them. Now when you pull up these reports, if they don't have the accurate year-to-date information, so for example, you come in here and it says 2017, as long as you've done the payroll update for the new year, what you can do is simply come into the design and delete it, and then exit out. And when you go back in, that design will refresh with the current year's figures in it. So we have one for EI, and then we have one for CPP as well, depending on the pay frequency you're on. And again, as far as deleting those designs, you can only do that with these underscore designs here. Obviously, if you were to delete any other report design, it would be completely gone. But in this case, it will refresh for you. So for the EI, it'll just ask you for the year. You put the year in, and so it'll show you what the insurable earnings are, what the system deducted, and what thinks the calculation was. So my calculation's still looking at the prior year here, but then it'll have the variances, and so then you can make any adjustments for that. Again, ideally you want to run these before the last pay of the year, because if there are adjustments that you do need to catch up, you can do it at that point on the last pay. The CPP one is similar to the EI, except this one is going to ask you for a date range. So you need to put in your date range of periods. You should check the check date flag when running the report. And now this report really should be more used as a guideline. So if there are variances, don't take that as you need to go in and make those adjustments. And the reason for that is because of the exemption. So we can, in the report design, we have to make certain assumptions that you worked all these number of pays, so then it calculates the pay period exemption amount by those number of pays. But again, that could be off. If you opened up a special bonus pay where you told it not to take the CPP exemption, then that's going to factor into it. If there was a pay where they didn't have enough earnings for CPP, then that's going to be a factor into it. So again, definitely the CPP report, use it more of a guideline. If somebody does have a variance that seems off, and what I would do is go into print payment history and run that for the year so that you can see the detail by pay period and see if there actually was an issue there, or again, if it was just a case of the exemptions being wrong because of the other items I had mentioned. far as running the T4, so we have our T4 summary report. So when you go in here, you have different fields in the screen. So again, most of the boxes will already pull automatically, but there's different fields in here, and the same fields will be in the T4 screen um, because of different setups. So for example, box 20, which is RPP contributions, if you use D05, we automatically default to include that in there. But if you set up D15 for RPP, then you want it to show in that, then you would add that into the box here. As mentioned, for the benefit codes, again, as long as you use the B codes, it's going to know where to put those benefits in. But if you used an earning code for like an allowance or kind of an in and out entry, and you need to now show that as a benefit as well, then you can add that to these fields for box 30, 31, 32, and box 40 as well. But again, as mentioned, if you're using the B codes, you don't need to specify that in here again. It's only if it's under a different, like an earning code, and you need to show it in those benefit boxes. Pension adjustment, so we automatically include the amount. In Jonas, we stored under M07. So if that's been calculated during the year, that'll automatically be reflected. But if you have another deduction that you want to include in there that's not part of M07, then you can tell it to add it in there as well. 66 and 67 are your retiring allowances. So again, if you have something that needs to go into that, you would have to have that amount, as mentioned, under like a specific earning code in the year to date, but then it would pull onto the T4. And then we have Status Indian, WCB repaid, Transit Pass, which I think as of 2018 has gone away, and then your private health services. There's a few provinces that have that. Union dues. So if you you can, by default, you don't necessarily have to show the dues on the T4. It really depends on the union. So some unions will issue T4s themselves. Others want you to issue the dues. So this one here, though, will just print the dues on the report. We'll see in the T4 screen in a minute where you can actually do selected unions for that. Under options, so we have 3 fields in here. So to do not print donations. So in our system D08, we reserve that for donations, but you can use that for other purposes. So if you did use it for another purpose, you don't want it to show us donations on the T4, so you would check that. And a similar sort of thing, commissions is E09. So again, if you don't want that to show us commissions, you use D09 for bonuses. You would check that flag so it doesn't show us commissions. And then lastly, the D05, which I mentioned, we default to show in box 20. If you use D05 for like an RRSP deduction or some other type of deduction, then you would check that, and it will not show in that box then on the T4. And then we also have here to not print pension adjustment for selected unions, so similar to T4s. Some unions may not want you to show the pension adjustment on it, so if that's the case, you can specify which those unions are. When you go ahead and go in to view it, and so basically it's going to give you a summary of the employees, what amounts are going to go into their boxes, including all their benefits. And at the end, you'll get a total, which again, you would want to try to tie back to all your remittances for the year to make sure that everything is tying out. When you are running your T4s, if you do have a second business number, so if you have multiple EI, a reduced EI, and a regular EI, when you run it, it will give you the option of which RP number you're going to run it for. And again, that's only if you have a reduced EI rate. Otherwise, it's just going to do it. You won't get that prompt if you just have the 1.4 is your EI factor. So if we go into our print T4 screen, again, you'll get the option for which EI rate. And so T4s can be run over and over, so it never cuts it off and prevents you from running T4s. So they can be run during the year, they can be run at any point once the year is done. So you don't have to run them before you actually start processing your 2019 payroll. When you come in here, the year will default to a year prior to what's in your profile. So if you are running them in December, you'll have to change that tax year when you go into the screen. But come January, it'll default to the correct tax year at that point. Generally, you'll leave it from beginning to end. If you do want to do selected employees, as opposed to just putting that employee's surname in here, I would click over here to Selected Employees tab and choose them from this area instead. Because you could have employees with the same last name, so if you put that as a surname, it's going to print more than the one employee that you want. So selected employees, it's easier. You can just go in and choose who those employees are. As far as printing the T4s, we have various options. We have our own pre-designed T4 form that prints all the boxes, and it's been approved by CRA. And so that's usually the easiest option to use. Rather than trying to get it to line up with the form that you download from CRA, this one prints all the boxes and everything for you. If you do want to print on the actual forms though, you would choose either laser forms 4 copies each or B laser forms 3 copies each. And the way these work is when you run them, with the 4 copies each, basically what it'll do is it'll go through and run a copy of each person, which is kind of designed to be the copy for the government. Then it'll go and run 2 of each employee, which is the employee copy. And then it'll go through one more time and print one more copy of everybody, and that's for the employer copy. But now, generally, everybody's filing electronically. So again, if you're using the form from CRA, you generally would choose this option here, 3 copies each, because you really don't need to print off the copy for CRA because you're going to be submitting it electronically. As mentioned though, most will use the F option, the Jonas pre-printed laser form. And again, if you just choose this and don't check any of these flags at the bottom, it will again do the cycle for T4. So 1 for CRA, 2 of each employee for the employee, and then 1 for the employer. So what I would do when using this option is, first of all, the first time through, check this flag here to print only 1 T4 for checking. And then that way, first of all, you can use it to check it, make sure everything looks good. And if everything is good, you can just keep that as your copy. And then when you want to turn around and do the employee copy, you would just uncheck that and check this last flag to get the employee copies only. And that'll print again 2 of each employee when you choose that option. When you're doing the employee copies, it'll ask you if you want the info page, so you do need to print that. And it's basically kind of like the back of the T4, indicating all the details about what goes in all the boxes on there. And then at this point here, you can do a test pattern, and when you say no, it'll go ahead and run the T4s. Now, if the T4s are slightly off in the alignment, at this point here, you see you do have horizontal and vertical modifiers. So if I want to pull the figures to the left, I can do a negative number. If I want to push them to the right, I can do a positive number. Similarly, vertically, if I want to pull them up on the form, I can do a negative number. If I want to push them down, I would do a positive number to help with the lineup. Now, if you do have this situation where your first T4, you can get it to line up, but the bottom T4 is kind of drifting down, so it is not lined up. Easiest thing to do in that case is to actually set up a printer style for the T4. So if we go to System Administration, System Setup, Printer Styles, and so I would just set up one here. I called it, in this case, T4. Just set it to GUI, and in the preferences, check all these bold flags. And then if you go ahead and choose that printer style when you run the T4, that usually will do the trick to get both T4s to line up for you. So again, that's only required in the instance where, as I mentioned, the top T4 is lined up, but the bottom T4 is slightly off in that case. Going back into our T4 screen, so as mentioned, same boxes as we have on the T4 summary screen for the different benefits. If we go to more boxes, that's where we have some other predefined ones. So quite often the more common ones used here will be W77, WCB repaid, or 71 for status Indian. And then if you have any other boxes, such as the retirement allowance or that, you would just specify the box number and specify where that amount is sitting in your year-to-date file. So whether it's an N code, an E code, an M code, wherever that value is sitting in, you would specify it in here. Again, if you're printing dues for all T4s, you can just check this flag, or if you only want to do it for selected unions, you can come in here and choose those unions that you want to print the dues for. One thing to mention with the dues, if you have redirection of dues set up, you may need to adjust that possibly. And so what that is under Payroll Config, Special Payroll Options, we have the ability to redirect the employee pays to different deduction codes. So one thing, and again, this only matters if you're printing the T4, if you're printing dues on the T4s. But if you've redirected your monthly dues, you've set them up under the employee pay section instead, and you redirected it to D06, you do have to come in here and remove that temporarily while you run the T4s, or otherwise the dues are going to be double posted excuse me, on the T4. And that's only if it's set to D06. If it's set to any other deduction code, you don't have to remove it in that case. Also though, if you happen to set up an employee pay in the union for something other than a due, so let's say you set up an RSP on the union level and you don't want that to show as dues on the T4, again, you would have redirected it likely in here as well, so you would have to remove that redirection again temporarily while you print the T4s so that it doesn't show as dues when it should not. And then as soon as you're done, the T4s come back in and add the redirection back in here. So you want to obviously make sure timing wise that while you're doing the T4s, somebody's not actually processing a live payroll so that things don't get out of whack when it comes to those to the dues. Going back to the T4s, same thing for the pension adjustment, except this one is do not print for selected unions. If you have unions that don't want the pension adjustment, or they're going to be issuing a T4 for the pension adjustment. And under options, again, we have the same ones for the donations, the commissions, the box 5. Where it's also flagged for printing the return address. So by default, we just print the company name on the T4 because that's all that's really mandatory, that's required. But if you want your company's address to show on there as well, that's where you would check the flag so that it shows. And if you had to do corrected T4s after the fact, we do have an option here to print amended on the top of the T4 when you reprint the T4 itself. But something new we've also added into the T4s is the ability to email them. So you can now email T4s. You would leave it on to the Jonas pre-printed laser form. And then where it says print T4 for, you would choose email T4s. Now in order for you to be able to choose this option, and for it to actually issue email T4 for an employee, you have to set up a password for that. So to do that, you need to go to Special Payroll Options, go to page 2, and down here in the bottom you'll see a flag that says Enable Password Encryption. So you would check that flag, and then that will enable a field in the employee's file to enter in that password. So you can ask the employee for a password if you want, or you can come up with some sort of numbering system that you want to use. Maybe you're going to use the last few digits of their social insurance number. It's up to you how you want to do that, but you need to put that password there in their file. So once that password is in, Then when we go back into print our T4s, as mentioned, you would choose email T4s, and like it says, it's only going to do it. First of all, they have to have an email address in their file, and they have to have a password. So if only those two conditions have to be true for it to generate an email T4. Once the T4s once it does do the emailing T4s, it will also print a list at the end, just showing you who has been emailed a T4 as well. They'll be in your sent box as well, but it also prints a report so you can see who got one emailed. And then for those who you don't have a password or you don't have an email, you can choose option number 3 for employees that are missing one of those two items, and it will just print a T4 for those employees. And then if you're just going to skip emailing altogether, you just leave it on all employees at the top here. One other note to note about the password encryption is once you set that up, it actually will also apply to earning statements. So if you email earning statements, those will also become password encrypted. And so basically what will happen is when the employee goes to open up their email and click on the attachment, it'll pop up a window for them to enter in their password for them to actually be able to view the document. So earning statements, we allow those to be emailed regardless if you have a password or not, but T4s you have to have a password. And like I said though, once you do set up the password, it's going to apply to both documents. And I would leave it set up in there because I think it's good that the earning statement is also password encrypted as well. As far as filing T4s to CRA, that would be this option here. So you choose magnetic media internet file. So we're still in the print T4 screen. Under form, you're choosing the magnetic media. You're going to say OK. And it's going to take you to the screen here where you need to fill in all your details. Now the transmitter number is not something that's required, but you do have to add something in this field, and it needs to start with 2M. So if you put MM in all 5s or all 9s or all 0s, any of that will be fine. Again, you need all the fields filled in here. These are contact numbers. They could be the same, they could be different. Just if the CRA needs to contact somebody about the file. And you do need to put a dash with the phone number as well. And then your email address. And you want to make sure you have the full revenue candidate, your full business number in there, not just the 9-digit number. You need to see the RP portion. And then you have your file name. So the file name, I usually recommend you add the year to it so that it differentiates it from other years. And again, if you happen to have a reduced EI factor and you've already changed it in the system, this way you can just set it back to what it was for that year's T4s. Go ahead and say OK. And it'll come up and it'll tell you it's created it, where it saved it, and the number of T4s. And then you can go onto CRA's website and basically submit that file at that point. A couple things to, again, why it may come back with errors. If there's just some weird characters or something in the employee's address or name. Also, if the SID number is missing, that's going to kick out. So again, if it bounces back, it's usually one of those items that you need to correct and then resubmit it. If you have multiple payrolls under the same business number and you want to combine them into one file, you can. You would just create your first file, and then you'd go into your second payroll. And again, put all the information in as the same. And the key is with the file name, you give it the same file name as you did the first file. Again, you can only do this if they're under the same business number. And so then it'll come up and it'll say, do you want to append the file or do you want to overwrite it? So obviously if it's you want to combine it, you're going to say yes to append it, and then it'll combine them into one. So now it's showing here we have 8 T4s instead of 4 T4s. And so also an important reason why you want to differentiate the name, because you don't want to accidentally append a prior year's T4 file if it's still sitting out there on your drive. Releve 1s, which are for Quebec. So for Releve 1s, again, like the T4 summary, we have a Releve 1 summary that'll print the details. When you run it, you have the option of a regular or special tax benefit. So when you choose that flag, and generally most cases it will be checked, is under payroll config and special payroll options. If we go to page 2, there's a special flag here that says activate special QC tax benefits, and that basically just changes the meaning of some of our benefit codes. So if you have that checked, then you would choose the special tax benefits option as well when you're running the Releve 1s. Now for the Releve 1s, we don't have our own designed Releve 1 form, so you do need to order those forms. You can't download them from Revenue Quebec. You must order the forms from them, and they will forward them to you. There's two types of forms you can get. One is it has one copy of on a page and then all the details, and the other one has two copies on a page, and then another page for the information page. So we line up with either one. So whichever one you want to purchase to order, you can. Again, you have the option if it's the regular laser or with the special tax benefit option. We have different fields in here. If you have, again, similar sort of thing to T4, something that needs to go into these boxes. Again, as long as that amount's sitting in a bucket in their year-to-date file, then you can have it show on the Releve 1 as well. And we've also added in options for the other information at the bottom of the T4s. If you are doing electronically, you need to specify what your Releve 1 form numbers are, because those forms will have a number assigned to each of them on there. So you'd put in what your starting Releve number was. And when you say OK, again, it'll tell you you're using the one-part form. If you say yes, it's going to line up with that. If you say no, it's going to line up with the two-part form. And again, you'll choose your printer and the same sort of thing. Again, if things aren't lining up, you can use the horizontal and vertical modifiers to adjust where it's going to show on the T4. Oh, sorry, on the Releve 1. We also handle electronic filing, so for that you would choose your XML file. And similar sort of thing where you need to put in all your information in here. And again, I would put in the file name the year just to differentiate it from other years as well. Now just a couple of things as far as starting off the new year in Jonas. So the first thing you want to make sure you do is once your last pay is done in the year, you want to come into your profile and change your current tax year, excuse me, your current tax year here to the current year, whatever the current year is going to be. So again, if you have a pay ending that falls at the end of December, but the check or the deposit is going to be made in January, that has to be considered part of the new year's T4s. Even though it was all worked in December of the prior year, because you pay it in the new year according to CRA, that needs to be considered part of the new year's T4 and year-to-date wages. So as soon as you're done the last pay period you're paying in the year, I would come here and change this so that the next time you set up a pay period, it's going to default to this tax year. Other items you want to do at the start of the year is look at how many pays you're going to have for the next year, if you're weekly or bi-weekly. And if you're weekly, weekly or bi-weekly, you'll have those years where you're going to have an extra pay period. So if it is, you count out all your periods and you're going to have 53 or 26, then you just specify that in here. Or sorry, 53 or 27. And that's to ensure that, mainly with the CPP, that it gets calculated correctly as well. So it's important that, again, to avoid peer reports, that you change that at the start of the year. If it's the case where you've realized halfway through the year that you didn't change this, at that point I wouldn't really bother changing the flag. I would suggest instead that when you set up that final pay period of the year, that excuse me, you just click on bonus here, which will tell the system, or no, sorry, not bonus. You tell it to not take the CPP exemption, that pay. So that'll avoid it taking an extra CPP exemption for the year. But ideally, you want to determine that at the start of the year, adjust your profile accordingly so that it will tax it accordingly as well. As far as rates and that, again, they will be updated automatically by when you run your year-end update. So you'll log in on the Sport website, and generally there'll be a payroll-only update, or if your version is on there, you can run your version update as well, as that will contain the payroll tax changes as well. The only items you would need to update in the employee's file would be their exemptions. So in their taxes screen, so if the exemption fields are 0, the system assumes the basic amount. But if it has a basic amount in here, the system will roll that over automatically the first time you calculate the taxes in the new year. If they claim anything other than basic, though, you should be giving them new TD1 forms to complete, and then go in and adjust the exemption amounts manually based on the new totals on their TD1 forms. As far as rates, at the end of the year, generally the only rate excuse me, that you'll be updating is your workers' comp rate. So that could be in different places depending on your setup. The first place to look is under your company profile and under burdens, and you could change the rate there. And this rate gets used when there's no rate code attached, so it goes to like ZZ province code. This is where it's pulling the rate from. Also in the profile and other costs, you may, if you just have one workers' comp rate, you may also have it set up in here. If you do, again, you would come in here and update it in this spot. And then the last place is under Files and Detailed WCB Rate Table. And this is where you go in and update, if you have specific rate codes set up, where you go in and update those rate codes with the new rates. Now definitely before updating workers' comp rates for the new year, if you can, I would try and run and do your year-end workers' comp reporting first. Because once you change the rates, the next time you run the report, it's going to be based on that. Even if you're running it for the prior year, it'll be based on what it sees as the current rates. So if you do have to go ahead and start processing your payrolls for the new year, and you need to go back to the prior year, you would have to just temporarily change the rates back to the old ones, run your report, and then send them back again to the new year's rates. So that brings us to the end of the webinar. Thank you very much for listening.